What's the most terrifying unexplained or paranormal event you've personally witnessed? About 12 years ago, I was on tour with my band. We stayed the night at someone's house who was kind enough to take us in after a show. Our bass player, Dave, and I shared one room, and our drummer, Ty, was in the room right next to us. I woke up around 1 in the morning and couldn't fall back asleep. At about 2, Dave started talking in his sleep. It didn't sound like him, but it had to be him because no one else was there, right? I ignored it at first, but it kept going and made it even harder to sleep. So I finally said, "Dave, you're talking in your sleep." He replied, "Huh? I'm wide awake. What are you talking about? I haven't been able to sleep. I've just been lying here." I swear I heard someone talking, like an entire conversation. I wasn't half asleep or dreaming. I had been awake for a while before it started. It really freaked me out. I turned on the light and tried to calm down. We even went to get Ty, since he was a few years older, and I thought he might help. Eventually, we all went back to sleep. The next morning, we got in the van and headed to the next town. As we were pulling out of the driveway, Ty told me he hadn't said anything the night before, because he didn't want to scare me more, but he had noticed something strange. When he went to bed, the attic door in his room wouldn't stay shut because of the way it was hung. He put a heavy space heater in front of it to keep it closed. When we woke him up, the heater had been moved and the attic door was wide open. Screw that. Story 2. One night I was on my laptop as usual. It was pretty late and almost everyone in the house was asleep. It was completely quiet. Suddenly I heard a strong, clear knock on my bedroom door. I instantly froze. There were no footsteps at all, and the only person who could have been awake was my brother, who never knocks on my door anyway. I was also sure it was not him, because his room is next to mine, and his door makes a loud sound when it opens or closes. I would have heard it. I stayed frozen for about 5 seconds. Then I heard my brother come out of his room. I called him over and told him about the knock. He said he heard it too, and then told me something even creepier. Seconds before the knock, he had been heading out of his room when he suddenly heard someone call his name. Startled, he stopped moving to make sure he was not imagining it. That was when the knock happened. After a few minutes of talking it through, we came to the conclusion that the voice he heard was meant to stop him from catching whatever knocked on my door red-handed. While we were standing by our doors discussing it, our cat came running toward us and started acting strangely. It kept looking in my direction, but not at me, and jumping toward me only to land just short of touching me. That was creepy as hell. Story 3. When I was around 6 or 7, we had a cat that had kittens. We knew she'd had them because she had been pregnant, and then she wasn't anymore. The problem was that we had no idea where the kittens were. I remember wondering about it and looking right at the cat. I sort of asked in my head, "Where are your kittens?" but without using words, if that makes any sense. Immediately, the location came into my mind. It was through some broken boards just above our porch that the cat could jump into from the pillars on the side. I knew they were there. I walked straight over, climbed onto the stone pillar, and looked through the gap in the boards. The kittens were right there. I've never had a similar experience again in my life. Story 4. When I was about 10, I saw a large rocket fly almost vertically down into the sea. This happened on a small Mediterranean island. There was no explosion, no mention on the news, and no sign of it after it entered the water. No one else was nearby to see it. Story 5. I'm late to this thread, but reading some of these stories compelled me to post. This isn't my story, but my mom's. She is an extremely rational person, but this event caused such severe panic attacks that she had to return to live with her parents for 6 months. All of this happened a few years before I was born. My mom's first husband was a Navy pilot during the Gulf War. The carrier was about 10 days into its cruise and operating under complete radio silence. She hadn't heard anything from the ship since it left, but that was to be expected. This was a war. One night, about 10 days into the cruise, my mom woke suddenly in the middle of the night. She saw her husband standing in the room. It wasn't an ethereal form either. He appeared solid and exactly the same. The only difference was that his head was shaved. He said only one thing: "Goodbye." The experience startled my mom, and she couldn't get back to sleep. She went to the kitchen to get some water when the doorbell rang. All military wives know what a late-night doorbell means. Her husband had suffered a massive heart attack and died aboard the carrier. She was grief-stricken, but reasoned that the apparition had been a hallucination brought on by the stress of having a spouse deployed. Besides, with his head shaved, he hadn't even looked that familiar. Her mother and mother-in-law flew out immediately to plan the funeral and receive the body. She stayed strong until the first viewing. Her husband's lifeless body was bald. In a letter from his NFO, the shaved head was explained as the result of a lost bet. There had been no way of knowing this, and my mom suffered a minor mental break. Story 6. My dad died in a house fire in 1991. I was home at the time, on the other side of the house from him. He was sleeping. When I tried to wake him and get him out of the house by breaking a window and trying to jump into his room, I heard him say something, but I don't know what. I never told anyone in the family that he woke up, and the firefighters or doctors said he never did. He didn't die immediately. It was 3 days later, from smoke inhalation. A few days after he died, my sister told me she had a dream where he wanted her to let me know he was telling me to get away from the house. I've still never told her that he woke up. Some additional details. The part of the house where I was a converted garage, and I was goofing around on a new Super Nintendo I had just gotten. I didn't notice anything at first, until the fire had started to get out of hand. There were no fire alarms. When I heard the noise, I had no idea what it was. And when I opened the door from the family room into the kitchen, there was fire everywhere. I first made sure to get my grandmother, her dog, and a friend out. The friend had come over to play the Super Nintendo, and had recently broken his leg in a motorcycle accident, so he had to hop across the lawn to get out. After that, I tried going around the back from the garage to the porch to reach the dining room. No luck, too much fire and smoke. I tried further down the porch to get into the bathroom, couldn't reach the window. Then I went back to the front door, but it was locked. We never used it, always went in and out through the converted garage. Finally, I got to my dad's room, tried to jump in, and was knocked back by the smoke. I believe I yelled first, which woke him up. His door wouldn't have been locked, just closed. When I woke him, he likely tried to get out of the room, which is why the smoke pushed me back. He was a deep sleeper, so he was probably confused before he even opened the door to the hall, letting in the smoke and heat. I was 20 at the time, back home for winter break from college, so his child, but not a child, if you know what I mean. Even after 20 plus years, most of the shock and anger has faded. What still gets me is thinking about how much I would have wanted him to meet my children, and them him. Story 7. I have a very strong danger sense that has proven terrifyingly accurate both times I've experienced it. The first time was in high school, when I was training for cross country. I usually ran by a lake near my house, but one day as I got close, I felt a very strong no instinct. A fight against a powerful animal-like urge not to go any closer. I turned right around and went back home. When my mom commented on how short my run was, I explained what had happened, and she seemed alarmed, wondering if I'd had a panic attack. A few days later, police found a body in the lake. The more recent example was last year, when I was riding the DC Metro with my partner. We were on the Orange Line and needed to get off at a stop, also served by the Silver Line. Suddenly, I got that same strong sense again. I told my partner, and though he was skeptical at first, he trusted me, and we switched lines. Later, we learned there had been a stabbing on the Orange Line that same night. Story 8. I was watching my parents' dog while they were out of town. My sister had passed away in their house about a year earlier. While I was there, I saw a picture of her fall off the wall. Then I realized that every picture of her in the house had fallen, seemingly at the same time. They didn't keep many pictures up in general, so it was only 4 in total. I chalked it up to something shaking the house, even though we live in Ohio and I felt nothing. I went home to my apartment. Face up on my desk was a picture of my sister and me that I knew I had packed away. I don't believe in things like this, but it happened while I was still actively grieving her loss, and it hit me hard. I still can't explain it. Story 9. My mom passed away when I was 7. Fast forward to middle school. We were at a band clinic held at my mom's old high school. Each school prepared its own piece, and then we all learned the same piece to play together. We were waiting to go back on stage and chatting as a group when I looked over to the back of the room. There was a woman who looked identical to my mom. Same red hair, glasses, height, everything. I caught her looking at me a few times and smiling. I turned to tell some friends about it, but by the time I looked back, she was gone, and I didn't see her again that day. Later, when I graduated from high school, I received a French award. As I walked across the stage and posed for the obligatory photo with my department head, I looked out at the crowd. 3 rows behind my dad, stepmom, and aunt. I saw the same woman again. It was eerie, but also kind of nice. Story 10. I do not believe in ghosts or spiritual stuff, but this is probably the closest I will ever get to a supernatural encounter. I had just come back from a club and got dropped off by my mates. I was walking home and really needed to piss. When I got to my house, I sped up, then realized I had not brought my key with me. I had lost stuff in clubs before, so I wanted to be on the safe side. For context, I was 17 and living with my parents. I was standing at my front door, needing a piss and with no key. It was around 11:30, so I was not going to ring the doorbell because it would wake my mom or sister. Instead, I aggressively knocked on the front door window, knowing my dad would hear it. The window is not clear, it has patterns on it, so you cannot make out faces, only shapes and movement. Here is the creepy part. Through the window, I saw a red figure walk out of the back room and open the door for me. I thought it was my dad, but when the door opened, there was literally no one there. No one behind the door, no one in the corridor, nothing. It was like my dad opened the door and disappeared. Then my dad came out of the back room wearing a white shirt. At that point, I was completely creeped out because I 100% did not have my key on me, and some red figure that vanished had just let me into my own home. It still creeps me out to this day. This is not made up, I promise. I have posted this in previous threads, but whenever a thread comes up where I can share it, I take the opportunity in the hope of getting more opinions on what the hell happened. Story 11. When I was young, probably around 8 to 10, I caught chickenpox. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night and called for my mom because little kids can't do much for themselves when they're sick. A woman came into my bedroom, sat on my bed, and stroked my hair until I fell asleep. For some reason, I thought it was my grandmother, even though she was dressed strangely. When I woke up the next morning and went downstairs for breakfast, I asked where my grandma was. My mom told me she was at her own house, like always. I said she'd been in my room the night before, and my mom laughed and told me I must have been dreaming. Later that day, my aunt was babysitting me. I told her the story, and she asked me to describe the strange outfit. It sounded like a nurse's uniform from the 1950s or early 1960s. My family knew the previous owners of the house, and the wife had been a nurse in the 1950s. She had died a few months earlier. Can I say with 100% certainty that I encountered a spirit? No, but it's a spooky coincidence. Story 12. I have a lot of stories, but this one is my favorite. My grandpa, a tough-as-nails Marine veteran from the Second World War, had a small stuffed bunny. He kept it out in the open, and whenever he walked past it and thought no one was watching, he would gently pet it. This big, tough guy secretly doting on a stuffed bunny became an ongoing family joke. He later took his own life, and we all went to the house to deal with the police, the medical examiner, and everything else. We stayed there that night, and the house had an overall creepy feeling because of what had happened. We were all upset and struggling, doing dumb things to try to make ourselves laugh and cope. That's when we noticed the bunny had been moving. It would be on the dining table, and then an hour later, it would be in the den. I assumed someone was moving it as a joke, but everyone swore they weren't, and we never caught anyone doing it. I kept an eye on that bunny for the entire week. I never saw anyone touch it, but it kept changing places. I like to think my granddad was playing jokes on us. It's not the scariest story, but it's one I like. His cell phone also called his landline. That was strange too. Story 13. One night, I was making toast and standing at the kitchen bench, eating for about 5 to 10 minutes. I cleaned up, turned around, and every single cupboard door and cutlery drawer was open. They had all been closed when I went into the kitchen, and there was no way anyone could have come in and done it. I was home, alone. I also didn't hear anything open while I was there. It scared me badly. I froze for a few seconds, let it sink in, then calmly closed everything and went back to my room to hide until daylight. It was just one of several strange things that happened while I was growing up. Story 14. When I was 10, we lived on the north shore of Shuswap Lake in British Columbia. It was very rural then, with a population of around 400, spread over 10 miles of beachfront, with farms up in the hills. There was no town, just a store, a post office, and an old indigenous trail that wound through the forest for about a half-mile near where I lived. We played on that trail all the time. One afternoon, my family, mother, father, brother, and a friend, went for a walk along the trail. At one point, my friend and I ran ahead, out of sight of everyone. We stopped and looked around. In the forest, we saw a man slumped over a fallen, rotting log with chickens pecking around him. Even now, 50 years later, I can still feel the adrenaline as the figure lifted its head and looked at us with empty, pecked-out eyes. We screamed and ran back to the adults. When my parents came to the spot, only the rotting log remained. To this day, I would never dare walk that path alone. Story 15. When I was a kid, somewhere in the mountains near Mammoth, California, my dad, a few family friends, and I were out stargazing. Since I was from Los Angeles, it was the first time I'd seen the sky without light pollution, and I was fascinated. I pointed at a cluster of 3 stars and said, "Hey, look, it's Orion's Belt." My dad corrected me and showed me where Orion's Belt actually was. I asked what the other cluster was, and he admitted it looked very similar, but didn't know what it was. A little while later, what looked like the middle star suddenly started moving. It zigzagged across the sky for several seconds, then grew brighter and disappeared. To this day, the only explanation I can think of is some kind of experimental drone. But this was in the early 1990s, and I'm not even sure drones existed then. If it was a drone, it was incredibly advanced, because it stayed still long enough that several adults and I all thought it was a star. It's not the most exciting story, but it's the only thing I've ever seen that I truly can't explain scientifically. Story 16. Not me, but my stepfather's best friend, let's call him Jim, has supposedly experienced paranormal activity since he was a teenager. He's a court reporter, and my stepdad was a speechwriter. Very skeptical, stoic guys. There were countless stories. Once they got on an elevator full of people in downtown Atlanta. It stopped at a floor that was all kinds of wrong. 1940s decor, abandoned, dusty. Then the elevator went back down and opened on the opposite side of the building. Jim's dog died, and a week later, the stereo turned on by itself, playing a song Jim loved to play for his pet. There was no CD inside. It had snowed the night before, and there were paw prints in the backyard leading to the house, but none near the gate. He frequently finds giant piles of coins under his pillow. He lived in London for a time, thinking he'd escaped the spirit, which had begun scratching him hard on his arms and legs. After 6 months, he found a small pile of pennies in his bed, even though he hadn't been carrying American coins. I personally witnessed one strange event while Jim was around. I was walking down the stairs and felt something whip past my head and hit the wall. Looking down, I saw a quarter dated 1948. I thought my sister was messing with me, but she was at the lake with everyone else. Story 17. I guess this qualifies. When I was in 5th grade, I was walking under part of my school's covered walkways. It was raining, but not heavily. I was walking in a straight line when someone to my right yelled, "SC ball." I turned my head, but kept moving forward. When the excitement wore off, I remembered there was a pole ahead and stopped to make sure I didn't walk into it. I looked around and realized the pole was behind me. My wet footprints led straight up to the pole and then continued on the other side. Somehow, I had walked along the exact path of the pole without hitting it. Not exactly terrifying, but still the most supernatural thing I've experienced. As story 18. I saw the Phoenix Lights with my own eyes and have been a hardcore UFO, alien, and government conspiracy enthusiast ever since. The Phoenix Lights were a series of lights that appeared one after another on March 13th, 1997, forming a massive arc. They hovered in the sky for about an hour. Thousands of people reported seeing a silent craft the size of a football stadium passing over their homes, including the governor at the time, Fife Symington. It was never fully explained. Story 19. You should know that I consider myself a very rational person. I'm not superstitious, and I don't believe in psychic powers or the supernatural. My best friend Travis and I used to play guitar together almost every day. That detail isn't important at first, but it will be later. One day, we decided to go to the beach with our girlfriends and take some mushrooms. After a while, when they started to kick in, Travis said he wanted to wander off alone, so I stayed with the girls. We were all having a great time. As the sun began to set, Travis's girlfriend asked, "Where's Travis?" None of us knew, but I could hear him playing guitar. I suggested we follow the sound of the music until we found him. The girls said I must have unusually good hearing because they couldn't hear anything. I told them I could hear it clearly and to just follow me. Here's the strange part. I followed the sound for several minutes into the forest and walked straight to Travis. When we reached him, he didn't have a guitar, and I suddenly realized we had left our guitars at home. I still have no idea how that happened. Story 20. I lived in a haunted house with 3 roommates. They had moved in a couple of weeks before I did, and swore that a young woman was haunting the place. One of them said incense had been manually extinguished while no one was home. Another said they were feeling around in the dark for a light switch, and felt the hair on the top of someone's head, someone who wasn't there when the light came on. I was a proper atheist at the time, and knowing my roommates were a bit fond of weed, I assumed it was all nonsense. About a month after I moved in, I was lying in bed when I heard a girl crying in the hallway. 2 of my roommates were women, so I got up to check and see if someone needed comfort. I opened my door and found that I was the only person home. I'm still not a major believer in the supernatural, but I don't rule anything out anymore. Story 21. When I was about 13, I was home alone and heard a rattling noise coming from my dad's room upstairs. I went up to see what it was and saw my dad's computer chair slowly spinning to a stop, as if it had been spinning rapidly just before I got there. We lived in a 100-year-old house, and I usually explain it away by thinking maybe a rat jumped on it or something like that. Still, the noise was loud enough for me to hear it even with the television playing at a fairly high volume. Story 22. A lot of paranormal stuff happened to me when I was a kid. One thing that has always stuck with me happened when I was about 3 or 4 years old. Back then, I used to wake up randomly in the middle of the night for no known reason. I was still sleeping in my parents' bed, so I would just lie there and look around. Every single time I looked toward the doorway to the living room, I swear I saw 2 very tall figures standing there. They looked like the old farm couple from that famous painting, except they were thinner and had hollow eyes. At first, they never did anything but stare back at me. One night was especially strange. I woke up as usual and saw them standing in the doorway again, but this time something felt more off than normal. The ceiling fan was on high, and the blades were spinning so fast that the entire fixture was swaying back and forth. I looked back at the figures and noticed they had dark, creepy grins on their faces. I got scared and buried myself under the blankets, hoping they would go away. Then I heard the ceiling fan spinning even faster somehow. The pull chain beads were tapping furiously against the glass light cover. I peeked out from under the blankets, and the 2 figures were now right next to the bed, standing over me with their ugly smiles. I screamed bloody murder, and the glass light cover came loose and shattered on the floor. My dad jumped out of bed immediately and turned on the light, but the figures were already gone. I was crying hysterically, and it took my mom a long time to calm me down. A lot of other things happened while we lived there, but that was the worst. It was the worst house I ever lived in. Story 23. A little late here, but anyway. When I was about 12, I had a very vivid dream that I was at the funeral of a young child, but no one could see me. At some point in the dream, I realized that the dead child was my older sibling. As far as I knew at the time, I was the eldest. I woke up raving to my dad about being there and seeing them bury the older one, before finally passing out. I remember my parents were really shaken when I woke up, and they revealed that my mom had had a miscarriage a couple of years before I was born and had never told me. It freaked me out. Even now, I still get a little creeped out when my dreams are more vivid than usual. Story 24. My wife and I were getting dinner on the table. Our 4-year-old son was in the adjoining room when he suddenly said, "Hey, that's the job I had in my last life." He was looking at the television, where a man was shaping metal over a fire. We were shocked because we had never discussed reincarnation with him, or even with each other in his presence. We're atheists. I tried to get him to elaborate, but he just went back to what he was doing, as if he had never said it at all. Story 25. I was staying at a hotel while visiting family, and I ran back up to our suite to grab something before heading out to dinner. I noticed my brows were a little off, so I grabbed my eyebrow brush to touch them up, along with some lip gloss. I set the brush on top of the chest of drawers next to the television stand that sat on it. Standing right next to the dresser, in front of a mirror on the wall, I applied the lip gloss. When I went to grab my eyebrow brush, it was gone. I looked under the television stand on the dresser, underneath the dresser, and all around where I knew I had left it, over the course of about 2 minutes. When I checked under the television again, I suddenly heard something drop onto the carpet. There, in the middle of the floor, at least 4 feet away from the dresser, was my brush. I have no idea how it got there, or how I heard it drop several seconds after I had already noticed it was missing. There's no way it could have ended up in that spot from where I set it. It might sound like a dumb story, but I slept with the lights on anyway. Story 26. I was in a room that seemed to lose its color, and it was witnessed by another person. I enjoy reading these kinds of stories, so I'll contribute my unexplained experience. I've had a few strange things happen, but this one stands out. I'm a nurse who works night shift with a mostly geriatric population. One night, it was just me and my younger nursing assistant. She was sitting beside me at the desk, looking something up on the computer. Suddenly, I noticed a paper on the counter with colored lettering looked dim. The color wasn't strong anymore, like there was a haze in the air. I looked across the room and saw a sign, still hanging there today, that read "Pressure Points" in red. The colors were muted again. It felt like my eyes were losing the ability to see color. A general grayness filled the space. It wasn't a shape, just everything looking dull and washed out. I started to quietly panic, worrying I might have a brain tumor or multiple sclerosis, since loss of color vision can be a symptom. I didn't say anything because I didn't want her to think I was crazy. Then Tara, the nursing assistant, looked up toward the hallway and said, "Do you notice the hallway looks gray?" I was immediately relieved because it meant I wasn't imagining it. We watched as the grayness seemed to saturate not only the hallway, but the entire area around us. Then it began to concentrate near the hallway and the ceiling. Slowly, it drifted to the left and then disappeared. Afterward, it was like someone turned the lights back on. The colors returned to full saturation. Surprisingly, neither of us really freaked out, probably because as healthcare workers, we're conditioned not to. To this day, I have zero explanation for what it was. Nothing like it has happened since, and I've never heard of anyone experiencing something quite like it. I've heard of people seeing clouds or fog, but this wasn't like that. It felt like being inside something that filled the entire space. I've had other strange experiences, but nothing this odd. The fact that my nursing assistant saw it too only reinforces it. I hadn't planned to say anything because I thought it was just anxiety, but clearly it wasn't. Story 27. Some friends and I were smoking hash. Around 3 in the morning, we decided to play Bloody Mary. 2 of my friends and I went in first. Nothing happened. Then Allie went in, said Bloody Mary 3 times, and came back unscathed. While he was grinning about how foolish we were to think anything would happen, his nose suddenly started bleeding. When he realized it, he went into semi-shock and just sat there, shivering like it was minus 30 degrees. The rest of us just sat there, numb, trying to process what had just happened. No one slept that night. Edit: I forgot to mention that we were in a hotel room. Story 28. My family owns a cottage on a lake. About 80 years ago, there was another cottage on the same lake where 3 teenage girls died when it burned down. My grandmother was at her cottage at the time and heard the screams from across the lake. Every year around the same date, usually in early August, she continued to hear them. You could say it was just PTSD, right? Apparently not. My father, who wasn't even born when the fire happened, started hearing the screams when he was young. Out of 4 kids, he was the only one who heard them. When I was younger, I started hearing them too. The screams echo across the lake, but only my dad and I seem to hear them. It's terrifying. After I finally confronted my dad about it, he told me everything. The fire, my grandmother, and the history. He warned me never to go near the old fireplace, which is still standing around that date, because the closer you get, the louder the screams become. Now I try to avoid the cottage in early August. Side note, my dad has a theory about why we're the only ones who can hear the screams. My grandmother was supposed to stay the night of the fire and would have died, but that still doesn't explain why my dad and I are the only ones who hear it. Story 29. Our son was about a week old, and I got up in the middle of the night to feed him so my wife could sleep. He wasn't settling down, so I brought him into bed with us and let him sleep on my chest. After a while, I nodded off. Suddenly, it felt like a cacophony of women's voices screamed at me, "You're killing him!" I woke up with my heart pounding, trying to figure out who had yelled. Then I realized my son had rolled off and fallen between me and my wife, face down between the pillows. If I had stayed asleep, there was a high chance he could have died, since he was swaddled and couldn't move. It's the only thing I've ever experienced that I can't really explain, and I'm a pretty skeptical person. Story 30. Hopefully this won't get buried. Almost 3 years ago, I was on holiday with my family and my significant other, staying at my childhood home. That place has always been creepy, but nothing truly scary had ever happened to me. My older brother was usually the one things happened to. That night, I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning needing to pee. I was comfortable, cuddling my partner, so I tried to ignore it and fall back asleep. About half an hour passed, and I wasn't sleepy anymore and really needed the bathroom. I sat up and looked around for my slippers, and I almost peed myself when I saw a strange person lying in the fetal position on the floor. It was black, far darker than normal black, even though it was partially lit by a rectangle of light coming from the hallway. I immediately started crying. I was suddenly terrified, and it woke my partner, who stayed up comforting me until daylight. The next day there was nothing on the floor, but I was still extremely creeped out. Since then, I've only slept there once, and only with the lights on. It's been over 2 years since I last stepped foot in my childhood bedroom, and I don't plan on doing so anytime soon. That's just one incident, but so many things happen there that I don't like spending much time in that house anymore. Edit. Here's one of my brother's stories. When he was 20, we moved to another city, so he was living there alone. He often had friends over because he found the house creepy. One night, 3 of his friends were there playing on the PlayStation. They were sitting on a futon with their feet on the coffee table. They took a break to talk, and suddenly one guy's leg moved forward as if someone had pulled it. He was nearly in tears and left shortly afterward. The others stayed, but none of them slept that night. Another time, my brother was cleaning up and stacking dishes when an ashtray sitting on the counter suddenly exploded for no apparent reason. He wasn't smoking. That one might have an explanation, though. Once, my older brother and our youngest brother were cooking together with all the cupboards open, because they're messy like that. While they were messing around near the stove, they went to grab another plate. According to them, a bowl came flying out from the side and nearly hit my younger brother in the head. Story 31. I once watched a guy fall off a loading dock and then inexplicably pop back onto it, completely defying gravity. He fell, but somehow seemed to stop and just hang there for a second. His body was almost completely horizontal to the dock. Then I blinked and he was suddenly standing next to me again. I wasn't the only one who saw it. One coworker was so freaked out that he refused to ever work with that guy again. Everyone else avoided talking about it, but it was truly crazy. Story 32. I live in New Jersey, and one night some friends and I decided to look for a few creepy places described in Weird NJ, a book about strange stories, people, and locations around the state. We went searching for a tunnel called something like the Gateway to Hell, which was supposed to be an entrance to hell located under some train tracks in Clifton. We didn't know which tracks, so we just drove around looking. As we drove under a random set of train tracks, the car suddenly became unbearably hot for no apparent reason. Within seconds, it felt easily 20 degrees warmer, even though the heat was already on because it was winter. My friend then pointed out that the car's thermometer, which should have read somewhere around 30 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit, suddenly jumped up to 105. This was supposed to be the outside temperature. All of this happened in about 15 seconds. Once we got roughly 30 feet past the underpass, everything went back to normal. We immediately decided to leave and sat in silence for a while, not really knowing what to think. Story 33. This will probably get buried, but whatever. When I was in 4th grade, I used to stay over at my friend Greg's house a lot. His family was cool and didn't mind me hanging around. Greg always claimed his house was haunted. Footsteps in the hallway, shadowy figures, that kind of thing. But I never took him seriously. I'd just tell him to shut up and that he wasn't scaring me. One night, we decided to sneak out and toilet paper a friend's house down the street. We thought we were badasses. We waited until about 3 in the morning, stole a roll of toilet paper from the bathroom, and quietly slipped out the front door. We were only gone for maybe 15 minutes, but we were exhausted when we got back. We went to the television room and settled in. Greg slept on the pull-out couch, and I slept on the floor. I was a weird kid and preferred it. After watching television for a bit, we turned it off and tried to fall asleep. The moment the television went off, the light in the kitchen suddenly became extremely bright and loud, almost like it was about to explode. Then we heard footsteps run from the kitchen toward us. I swear I'm not making this up. The couch cushion next to me sank down as if someone had just sat on it. I whispered to Greg, "What was that?" He immediately told me to shut up, and then the entire sequence happened again. Bright light, footsteps, couch. I pulled the covers over my head and somehow fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Greg getting in trouble. His mom had noticed the last roll of toilet paper was missing. Rookie mistake on our part. Story 34. A friend and I were walking home along the train tracks one night. It had rained the night before, and there were large puddles everywhere. Once we got far enough that the streetlights no longer lit the path, we heard splashing ahead of us. We stopped and looked at each other, both expecting some kind of animal to dart into the woods. Instead, we saw a skinny, bald man crawling out of the water with a look of pure fear on his face. Half concerned and half terrified, we stared as he struggled toward us. Then we realized he had no legs. His eyes were wide, and his mouth was open as if he were screaming, but no sound came out. Without saying a word, we turned around and took the long way back to my house. I haven't seen that friend in about 7 years, and I still wonder if he remembers what we saw. I pass those same tracks regularly, and I always think about that night. I believe we saw the ghost of someone who was killed by a train. In the years leading up to that night, several people, including a family friend, had been struck and killed on those tracks. I've never shared this story before. Story 35. I have a few stories. If you all like this one, I can share an even better one that would take a while to type out. A couple of years ago, I was planning to travel north to San Francisco by myself for the first time. I was really excited, right up until the night before. I was sitting on the couch watching television, feeling completely fine, when I suddenly got a terrible feeling and saw a flash of red in what I can only describe as my mind's eye. Within seconds, my mom came running downstairs, clearly panicked, and said, "You know you don't have to go tomorrow, right?" In that moment, I knew I shouldn't go. The next day, in a completely different city, the Boston bombings happened. I can't shake the feeling that something would have happened to me too if I had gone, alongside the tragedy happening across the country. Later, my stepdad told me that right when I saw that flash of red, my mom had run out of their bathroom asking where I was, sounding extremely alarmed. That part really freaked me out. Story 36. Okay, here's some spookiness. This happened to me a few years ago. First, a bit of background. I'm Muslim, and my family is Muslim as well. One of our beliefs is that there are spirits called jinn. They don't live in the human world, but they can visit it. They're unseen, and sometimes children are believed to be able to see or speak to them. Now, the story. I was visiting my cousins on my aunt's side of the family. They have 2 18-year-old boys and a 7-year-old boy. We had just gotten back from dinner when the youngest, who I'll call John, walked into the house first after his mom unlocked the door. He turned and waved at a plant sitting in a dark sitting room. We didn't think much of it. Later, his older brothers went into the living room to watch television while John stayed in the sitting room. I was nearby and watched him from behind a door. He turned toward the plant and started talking to it. It was a full conversation, complete with pauses, replies, and body language. Creeped out, I told one of his older brothers. He said, "Yeah, he does that sometimes. I've woken up late at night to use the bathroom and seen him talking to the plant." Once I asked him who he was talking to, and he said, "A friend." When I told him to go to sleep, he turned to the plant and said, "Bye, I'll see you tomorrow." We were both unsettled. Then I wondered out loud if maybe John thought he was helping the plant grow. His brother replied, "Once, he brought candy and put it on the couch near the plant. He told me it was for his friend who sits by the plant." That night, we decided to move the plant without telling him. He wasn't even home at the time. Later, we found him near the couch. We set down a recorder to hear what he said to his friend. This is what John said. "Hello? I'm good, you? Why? Who moved it? But why would they? I'm sorry. I'll try to get it back for you. Did you like the candy? Sorry, I didn't know. I'll go ask them for the plant." He then came into the other room and asked us why we moved the plant. We never told him we had moved it, and no one else was around to tell him. To this day, I don't know how he knew. It was just strange. Story 37. Maybe Reddit can help with this. In the early 1990s, there was a TV show called Sightings that aired right before The X-Files. It covered real-life stories about ghosts, UFOs, psychics, and other unexplained phenomena. I was watching an episode in late 1992 or early 1993 with a friend. The episode featured several psychics, and most of it was the usual stuff. But one psychic was convinced that something terrible was going to happen. To the World Trade Center. A few weeks later, The first attack occurred in February 1993. My friend and I just looked at each other, stunned, since we had only seen the episode a few weeks earlier. I wish I had taped it. I still can't find that episode anywhere. Story 38. I'm very late to this, but maybe someone will see it. When I was around 9, we rescued a dog we named Billy. Billy was a 90-pound pit bull mix. He was fiercely protective of my mom and me, and he loved sleeping in bed with my parents. One night, I woke up to a lot of commotion. My dad was downstairs, and my mom was standing in the hallway. I asked what was going on, and my mom told me my dad thought someone was breaking in. My dad was a police sergeant, and after hearing a crash on the first floor, he grabbed his sidearm and went downstairs. A few moments later, he came back up looking very worried. He said the house was empty, with no signs of forced entry and nothing stolen, but all the pictures on our mantle were face down and a few frames were shattered. He also said Billy, who was usually the first to defend the house, had sat on the stairs crying and growling and refused to follow him down. We eventually went back to bed, but what really unsettled me was that Billy came to sleep in my room. Like I said, he adored my mom and always slept with my parents. That night, though, he lay on his belly by my legs and never put his head down, constantly looking around. I finally drifted off, only to wake up to Billy standing over me, his entire body covering mine, growling more fiercely than I had ever heard. He was growling at the doorway, but there was nothing there. I screamed for my parents, and I'm not ashamed to admit I slept in their room for the rest of that night, and for a few nights after. Story 39. Every time I see a thread about things like this, I'm reminded of another user's story. I can't remember all the details exactly, but they said that as a kid, they were jumping on a trampoline in their backyard. Beyond the fence, they noticed a flat object, maybe a piece of cardboard, being pushed around by the wind. It suddenly came to a stop and unfolded into a strange, human-like figure that immediately turned to stare at them. Its face had a manic smile. I don't know why, but I've never been able to forget that story. Story 40. I've posted this before, but it was a long time ago. I was a home health nurse caring for a girl dying from advanced AIDS in the early 1990s. She was legally blind and in such poor condition that it took 2 nurses to bathe her and change her bed. Another nurse was with me when the girl suddenly asked her who the man standing behind her was. She described him as thin, with reddish hair, a baseball cap, and jeans. The other nurse went completely dewias, pale, stopped what she was doing, and left the room. We were almost done anyway. Outside, the nurse pulled an old photo from her wallet. The picture showed a man who looked almost exactly like the girl had described. It turned out to be her father, who had died years ago when she was a child. The patient passed away within the next few days. I'd call it impossible, except the other nurse was literally shaking and had never even been to that patient's house before. Story 41. Obligatory. This will be buried. This is for those of you who have spent way too long on the thread. Anyway, I was out on a training op with the Marines as a safety vehicle driver, so I ended up being a glorified chauffeur for the duration of 2 weeks. About a week into it, my buddy and I were walking to the bathroom, aka the woods, when we passed a guy who looked remarkably like a friend I had back home. As we passed him, I mentioned offhandedly that he looked like that friend. Whatever, I didn't think anything of it. No shit, the very next day I was messing around on Facebook, and my feed blew up about a guy from back home who had offed himself. Guess who? I didn't think about my comment for several days, until I saw the guy again, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I know it's not really supernatural, but it was such a strange coincidence that I thought I'd share. Since this is buried as hell, I might as well get on the old soapbox and say that a simple text or call to the people in your life might make a difference if they're going through shit. You never know when you've had your last conversation with a friend or family member until it's too late. Story 42. To me, it's more funny than creepy. At the time, I was living in a bachelor's apartment, so it was just one big room. My youngest brother, about 11 at the time, came to visit. It was the middle of the night, and everyone was sleeping. My girlfriend was awakened by the rolling of a computer chair. Freaked out, she woke me up. What I saw was my brother clicking away on the unpowered computer and monitor in the dark. He was speaking as if he was in a game of League of Legends, yelling at his teammates. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be creeped out, so I just told him to go to bed. He was never fully awake. He just got up, pushed the chair back in, and went to bed. He's always had a history of sleepwalking, but never like this. To this day, I wish I had recorded it. Story 43. When I was about 15, my family bought a 200-year-old house in the middle of nowhere in Virginia that even had old slave quarters in the backyard. We used it to store the lawnmower, weed eater, and other yard equipment. The first night we stayed there, we came downstairs to find the front door wide open. My mother immediately claimed the house was haunted and that we were being told to leave. I rolled my eyes and went back to my room. Then weird stuff started happening throughout the house. In my bedroom, my computer would turn on in the middle of the night. My radio would switch on by itself. About once a week, one of my electronic devices would go crazy for no apparent reason, and it was genuinely unnerving. Things would end up opened or closed at random. At first, I suspected my little sister was playing some kind of joke, but some of the windows and other things being moved were beyond her reach. That still didn't explain the electronics going haywire. The worst scare I ever got was when the TV in the room next to mine, not my bedroom, turned on around 3 in the morning. I had been watching MTV2 earlier that day, and of course, the volume was up. It started blasting some screamy Slipknot song, and I woke up thrashing, trying to get out of bed. My whole family came upstairs because it disturbed them too. My mother decided we needed to research the house. It turned out our home was listed as a historic building, with plenty of information available at the local library. Part of that history involved a priest who, for some unknown reason, had hung himself in what became my younger sister's bedroom. We never told her. A little Vietnamese woman who cut my hair once told me she believed in supernatural things. To entertain her, I told her about the strange stuff going on in our house. She gave me a tiny statue of a little man and told me to put it somewhere high up in my home. I placed it on top of my tallest dresser, the highest spot inside the house that wasn't the attic. All the unexplained stuff in my room and downstairs stopped immediately, except for the occasional strange noises coming from the attic. We never went into the attic. I turned 18 and moved out. Eventually, my family moved out too. It probably got lost during the move, but when the time came to clear everything out, the little statue was nowhere to be found. I remember thinking, I hope the next family that lives there finds him, when my mom told me. Story 44. Not that creepy as a story, but pretty creepy to experience. I always sleep with the TV on, with the sound turned down very low. Darkness and silence don't relax me, but having the TV too loud is distracting, so I usually keep it at 1 or 2 bars, just enough to hear it. I've done this almost every night since I was a child. One night, right at 3 in the morning, my TV volume suddenly started to increase. I woke up from the sound and looked at the screen, watching the volume bars slowly climb. I grabbed the remote, thinking my cat might be sitting on it, but she wasn't anywhere near it. Freaked out, I turned the TV off and sat up, trying to process what had just happened. About a minute later, my boyfriend came into the room, complaining that his computer had screwed up. He had been in the other room, staying up all night mixing and recording music as usual. I asked him what happened, and he said the volume had started, randomly increasing without him touching anything, so loud that he had to rip his headphones off. I asked him when it happened, and he gave me a weird look and said, like a minute ago. I couldn't go back to sleep after that without taking a pill. Story 45. My dad was in the hospital, on his last leg. He was an alcoholic and had had many death scares before, and I didn't take it seriously. I randomly woke up at 7:45 in the morning, confused and crying. I grabbed my phone to check the time and then lay back down, trying to get some more sleep. At 8, the hospital called to tell me that he had passed away. I started crying again and asked what time he died. The nurse said about 15 minutes ago. That truly scared me. Story 46. I actually have a few stories. None of them are too major, just creepy things I've seen. One time, a couple of years ago, I was taking a shower. It was a normal day and nothing out of the ordinary had happened. When I was done, I stepped out and looked at the towel rack to grab a towel. The towel had a bulge in it, about the same size and shape as a human head. There was nothing underneath it. It looked as if someone were sticking their head through the wall and looking at me through the towel. It was creepy, but I figured it might just be the vent underneath blowing air into it in a strange way. I reached out to push the air out of it and touched it. It was solid, very solid. I recoiled and jumped back about a foot, and the shape sank away. When I took the towel off the rack, there was nothing underneath it. That scared the hell out of me. I also used to see a dark-skinned man wearing a beige suit and tie around my apartment building, always for just a split second before he disappeared. I saw him a couple of times in the lobby, sitting there, with one leg crossed over the other. I even saw him once inside my apartment like that. This one wasn't terribly creepy, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Story 47. This will be so far down the post it might never be seen, but for you lucky scrollers, I have a story. In our old house, my father went downstairs one night to use the bathroom around 2 a.m. To reach it, you had to go through the living room, then the kitchen, then the porch, and finally the loo. It was a pain. When my dad got to the bottom of the stairs and went to open the living room door, he heard whispering, 2 or 3 hushed, rushed voices. He couldn't make out what was being said. His first thought was burglars. He grabbed a golf club from the hall and reached for the door handle. It was red hot and burned the hell out of his palm. He pushed the door open with his foot, and the whispering stopped. Dead silence. My dad rinsed his hand under cold water, used the toilet, and went back upstairs. He showed my mother the burn after waking her by shouting. She vividly remembers seeing a huge pink burn on his hand. By the next morning, it was completely gone. Not a single mark on his palm. For years, I thought maybe they had been drunk or high or something. But it happened to me, too. Almost the exact same situation. I was going downstairs to get some snacks after staying up all night playing DBZ Budokai. It was around 2 a.m. As I approached the living room door, I clearly heard whispering voices. Male and female tones, hushed and rapid, like arguing. I actually thought my parents were still awake. I opened the door, and the sound cut out completely. I tried to turn on the lights, and all 3 bulbs in the ceiling fan popped at once, shattering glass everywhere. I almost shit myself and slammed the door shut. I wasn't hungry anymore. Story 48. This happened to my mom, but it's still very interesting. My grandmother recently passed away from cancer, and my mom noticed some peculiar things both before and after she died. Before she passed, my mom's brother told her that he had been injured in a hockey game, but asked her not to tell their mother because he didn't want her to worry. Later that day, my mom was sitting with her mother while she took a nap. When my grandmother woke up, she asked, "Why didn't Steve tell me he got hurt at hockey?" My mom asked if anyone had told her, and she said no. When my mom asked how she knew, my grandmother looked at her and said, "Because I was with him." After she passed, there were a few things that could be coincidence, but still feel meaningful. My grandmother absolutely loved John Denver. Now that she's gone, my mom says that every time she gets into her car, the radio station she listens to is playing a John Denver song. Story 49. I've written about this before. About 7 years ago, when I was 29, I had a dream where I was in a large room that looked like a Catholic church, filled with huge ancient books. The room seemed endless, and the books were laid out on tables as if they were ready to be read. I walked down an aisle for a while and decided to look at one of these infinite books. The second I turned one of the pages, I woke up from a sharp pain on the inside fold of my elbow. There was an inch-long, semi-deep cut that had started to bleed, and there was nothing in sight that could have cut me. I looked around for several minutes and couldn't find anything sharp on my bed. I still don't know how I got that cut, but I feel like I wasn't meant to be in that room or look at those books, and that I was stopped by some kind of power. Story 50. I was spending the night at a friend's house as a kid, around 12 or 13. Our parents weren't home, so we decided to go out, do some ding-dong ditching, and get into a bit of harmless trouble. When we got back, it was around 1 or 2 in the morning. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Naturally, we assumed it was either the cops or an angry neighbor. My friend had a small window that looked out onto this front porch, but you couldn't really see in from outside. We peeked to see who was ringing so late. Standing at the door were an old woman in a dress and a young boy in a strange newsy outfit. Both were dressed completely out of period, and my friend had never seen either of them in the neighborhood before. We ducked, a little freaked out. When we looked again less than 10 seconds later, they were gone. No one was walking down the street, no cars driving away. They had vanished without a trace. We did not sleep well that night. Story 51. One summer a few years ago, I repeatedly saw small, star-like UFOs in the night sky. They looked exactly like stars or satellites, but they moved and made impossible maneuvers, like sharp 90-degree turns at what had to be extremely high speeds, completely reversing direction, or shifting from slow to impossibly fast. I saw them several times, and one night my whole family saw them while we were camping. I've brought it up on Reddit a bunch of times, and several people have commented that they've seen the same thing. I honestly don't know what to think about it. They were clearly real, but I have no explanation for what they could be. Story 52. On Monday, I started to worry about my grandpa. The feeling passed, and I went about my day. Later, I shared an article about automated lawnmowers, joking that my grandpa would love it since taking care of his yard was his hobby. Literally right after I hit share, my dad called me. We all know that feeling, the drop in your stomach when you know something terrible has happened, or is about to. The sense that your world has changed and there's nothing you can do. He told me my grandpa had been rushed to the hospital with a bladder infection, followed by several heart attacks, but that he was still alive. I didn't think much about my earlier worry until I woke up the next morning. The dream I had that night is what made it click. In the dream, I was sitting in my grandpa's shed watching something, and he sat down next to me. Without any pretense, he started talking. The next few weeks are going to be hard, and they will test you. Don't worry about me. In a few hours, I won't have any use for it. We spent what felt like hours talking about personal things I honestly didn't know or didn't remember about him. Most of what he told me was later confirmed by my dad and his brother to be true, though apparently a little exaggerated. My grandpa didn't die until around noon on Tuesday, just a few hours later, accounting for the 3-hour time difference after my dream. I'm not religious, and I never will be, but for F's sake, what the heck? I know the subconscious mind can do things like this, but some of the details he told me about his life were things I wasn't there for, or even alive for. Story 53. I lived with my boyfriend and his parents for a while in high school. All kinds of creepy stuff happened in that house, but by far the creepiest happened once when I was alone, getting ready for work. I went to the basement to get my uniform out of the dryer. I looked up just in time to see an empty rifle case swinging rapidly from a nail in the wooden rafter above. There was no wind down there. I was creeped out enough just by that, but as my attention was on the rifle case, a heavy chain, think huge links, at least 30 pounds, scraped across the floor as if someone picked it up and gave it a big yank. I ran out of there so fast I could have won the gold at the Olympics. Another time, I was lying in bed, half asleep and half awake. I could feel my legs sliding off the side of the bed, but was too asleep to stop it. All of a sudden, my entire body was yanked off my pillow. I'm talking a good 6 inches downward. I chalked it up to being asleep until the next morning, when my boyfriend's mom said, "I had a dream a little boy was playing cowboys and Indians with you. He wrapped your leg in rope and yanked you off your pillow." I had forgotten about being yanked until she said that. And sure enough, when I looked down, I had red marks around my lower thigh that looked distinctly like rope burn. Story 54. My mom says there is the ghost of an old man who stands next to her bed and screams silently. It makes no noise, but will still wake you up. She never mentioned him to me or my sister when we were young. We are in our 30s now, and honestly, why would you tell your kids something like that if they have never seen it? We moved from South Carolina to Atlanta when I was 17, and she says he was gone for a while. About 6 months later, though, he was back, like a pet that ran off at a rest area, and somehow made its way home. My stepdad laughed at the idea when they first got married, but 15 years later, he has seen him many times. They say he is not really threatening, more just annoying. I will visit and ask how they have been, and my mom will say, "Pretty good, except the damn ghost has been waking me up a lot lately." I have never seen anything supernatural, but my parents are not the sort of people who would lie about something like that for almost 2 decades. Story 55. I was very young when this happened and do not remember much about the event. But there was one day when I was getting into the car to stay with my dad for a few days, and I threw a major fit. Those who witnessed it say it was very unlike me, as I was always calm and quiet. It was not that I did not want to go, but that I did not want to be the only one to go. I wanted my brother Craig to come too, and would not calm down for anything. Craig had school and could not go, no matter how much I complained. So my dad eventually got me buckled up and ready to go, alone. That night, there was a terrible thunderstorm, and lightning struck a tree in the backyard of my grandma's place. That was where my siblings, Craig, James, and Cheyenne, were staying, along with my uncle and grandma. The tree fell onto the house, which caught fire. Everyone inside died in their sleep from the smoke. Even though I do not know why I was throwing that fit in the first place, I still feel bad that it was only Craig I was apparently trying to save. Story 56. This was a few years ago. A couple of months after my great-grandma died, a friend and I were hanging out in the basement of my grandma's house. My friend and I, along with my grandma, aunt, and great-grandma, had all lived in the same house. We very clearly heard footsteps upstairs, but I assume my aunt had stayed home from work that day and was walking back and forth to the kitchen. After a while, we went upstairs to get food or something. I checked my aunt's room, and she was not home. Then I checked my great-grandma's old room to see if anyone was in there, and it was empty. I just gave a nod to the urn that held her ashes and went back downstairs. Probably not very spooky compared to some things people have experienced, but I still cannot think of what would have made those footsteps. Story 57. As a funeral director's son, I spent a lot of time wandering funeral homes. As a result, I am pretty numb to the whole haunted house shtick, and not terribly bothered by bodies unless I knew them personally. I spent many weekends playing my Nintendo 64 in the crematorium office while my dad burned a few bodies on a spare shift. Anyway, to the point of the story. Despite the abundance of death, my family and I only really had one encounter with the paranormal. I was maybe 7 years old. Someone had lost their keys, so my dad was called to lock up the building. We went with him, planning to go to the movies afterward. I was wandering around while my dad checked lights and alarms, and my mom was looking through the viewing rooms. She liked the photo collages they made of the deceased for families to stand around and reminisce. I heard my dad shout, "All right, let's go." I met them in the hallway connecting the main viewing rooms near the entrance, and my mom asked, "Is anyone else here?" My dad said, "The employee might still be here, but I thought she had left when we arrived." My mom replied, "Well, I was in the main hall and saw an old man walk across the far end, from room 5 to room 6. "Oh, that's Jerry," my dad said. "People see him sometimes." Apparently, the funeral home was haunted by an old man named Jerry. My dad said no one ever recognized him. It was just a name they picked. He liked to stroll the halls, turn lights back on after they had locked up for the night, and flutter flowers without any breeze. My dad joked that Jerry must have been waiting for us to leave so he could mess with the lights my dad had just made sure were off. Story 58. My sister has a rare genetic disease that causes her pancreas to produce insulin like there is no tomorrow. 2. Make a long story short, it means she takes a lot of medication and can suddenly pass out. If it is not treated immediately, it can cause serious brain damage. It is like asphyxiation. About 10 minutes, and she is gone. Because of this, my mother came to school with her every day and sat in the teacher's room. She was the only one in my country, Israel, who knew how to treat the condition, aside from my father and a doctor who lived about 3 hours away. At the time, I was in 2nd grade, and my sister was in 3rd. We went to the same school. One day at lunch, I was sitting with my friends when I suddenly felt that something was wrong with her. I had no idea where she was, but I immediately started running as fast as I could toward the library, which was about 300 meters away. When I got there, I found my sister unconscious in the library. My mother saw me running like a madman and followed me to see what was happening. She arrived right after I did and treated her. I had no way of knowing that my sister had passed out. She was not in my line of sight or anywhere near me. It was not a coincidence where I just happened to run and find her. I did not even finish my lunch, and I was not a runner then or now. I never ran unless I really had to. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before or since. I still have no idea what happened that day. Story 59. When I was very young, around 5 or 6, I asked my mum one morning who the lady was who came to visit me at night. Obviously, my mum was concerned and asked me to describe her. I described an old lady, and it turned out I had described her grandmother, whom I had only met once as a very young baby. My mum's gran had been very much looking forward to meeting me before she passed away. She was excited to see me and wanted to see me again soon. However, she died a few days after meeting me. I like the idea that she was able to come and see me again. Story 60. I was 14, and it was July 4th. I did not feel right. Something just felt off. I was staying at a friend's house. I called my mum and begged her to come get me, insisting that something was wrong and she needed to come. She was 50 miles away and tried to reassure me, but she brushed it off. A couple of hours later, her car went off an 80-foot cliff after jumping a guardrail, and she had to be airlifted to the hospital. When she arrived, she had no pulse. She was in a coma for weeks, but later recovered, though with some expected setbacks. Story 61. I grew up on horror books and movies and have been in numerous life or death situations. I do not scare easily, and I know what fear is. In second grade, we moved down the street, maybe 5 minutes away, to a much larger house. It was great, a big yard, a big room, everything a kid could want. Sadly, the basement was unfinished. That was not a huge deal, since our previous basement had only been half finished, and I spent a lot of time down there. But I would not go into the new basement. I would freeze at the top of the steps and get this hollow feeling in my stomach. My parents told me I had an overactive imagination and laughed it off. Then things started disappearing, nothing of real significance. My parents shrugged it off. Handprints began appearing on the first floor mirror, and my younger sister and I were blamed every time. We could not physically reach the mirror, maybe the very bottom, with the help of a chair. One day we woke up to find all of our house keys missing. After searching for about 2 days, we replaced all the locks in the house. My mom was really spooked. The handprints appeared again, and she realized they kept appearing in the same spots and were larger than her hands, so they could not be mine or my sister's. After that, things seemed to quiet down. The basement no longer bothered me, and when I was in high school, we finished it. I spent quite a bit of time down there gaming. The summer. After graduation, my parents went on a month-long vacation, and my sister stayed with friends, leaving me home alone. That was fine by me. I had spent nights and even weekends alone before, but never for that long. Late one night, I was taking my dishes downstairs, and all the lights were off. That was fine. I could manage without them. As soon as I stepped onto the top stair, that same feeling I used to get at the basement steps hit me again, much stronger than I remembered. I stood there frozen for almost 15 minutes, while something inside me screamed that it was not safe to walk downstairs. I did not sleep that night. It has happened a few times since, although I do not lose sleep over it now. 2 summers ago, the worst happened. I sleep in pitch black, the only way I can sleep. I was dreaming about living in the place where I work. Then the dream shifted to driving around with friends, everything fine. Suddenly, some people turned into skeletons. There was blood everywhere, and people were panicking. A deep voice kept cutting through. I could not make out the words, but I knew it was addressing me and was not part of what was happening. I realized I was dreaming and woke up into sleep paralysis, still inside the dream. There was a shadowy, elongated, humanoid shape standing over my body. I tried to wake up again, fully aware I was still dreaming, but able to feel my actual body. I finally woke up in my pitch-black room and saw the same figure from the dream turn to look at me, then stand up as if startled and sprint out through my doorway. I experienced true terror then. I was once attacked by a lion in Africa, and was more coherent and less scared during that than after this. I later met with my pastor and prayed through the rooms of the house. We have had no issues since. Story 62. I have had a few unexplained experiences in my life, some of which people might call supernatural, but there are a few that stand out the most. The first happened when I was 12. I wrote in my diary about my Uncle Bud dying, and how I thought it would be romantic if he did, because my first boyfriend would hold me while I cried. There was no reason to think my uncle was going to die. I was an extremely sheltered and neglected child, and I did not really understand death, or how real it was, if that makes sense. The next morning, my father got a call saying my uncle had died, around the time I wrote that diary entry. It scared me terribly, and I felt guilty about it for years. In a strange way, it taught me about mindfulness and empathy, and how even your own thoughts can feel powerful, even something as harmless as a diary entry. At least, that is how I see it. The second happened when I was about 15 or 16. I come from a family of painters, and I was the only writer. I hated drawing or painting because I felt it was forced on me, mostly by my mother. One night, very late, I asked for some paper and pencils and started drawing feverishly. I drew a portrait of Virginia Woolf, a girl called Nobody, a boy named Will from a book I was working on, and a strange man I titled Missing. He had features I did not personally find attractive, though most people probably would. He had heavy brows, which I never favored, and eye color that was not my preference. Strangely, I drew him crying. My mother asked me, "Why is he crying?" And I replied, "I do not know, Mom. He is sad for some reason. He is missing someone." A few years later, I walked into a grocery store in a town where I was temporarily living. There was a man stocking shelves, and at first I thought he was another tall guy I had seen earlier that week. He was not. He was the man from my drawing titled Missing. That meeting began a profound and tumultuous romantic relationship that lasted 6.5 years. He later became one of the most influential people in my life, the third experience I posted elsewhere online. It may make some readers uncomfortable, but it changed my life for the better and made me a better human being. The last experience was the most bittersweet. My father passed away when I was 33. I am now 42. I am the youngest of 3 daughters, but I was placed very much in the role of a son rather than the sensitive daughter I actually was. My father became my closest confidant, my best friend, and my harshest critic. It was almost a marriage of sorts, not romantic or intimate. When he died of a massive heart attack, I was completely bereft. True to form, my dad left no will, only verbal instructions. He refused a military funeral and wanted his ashes scattered in a baseball park. He adored baseball, especially the Detroit Tigers. Our first plan was to sneak his ashes into Tiger Stadium, but the original stadium was torn down, so we abandoned that idea. His instructions were to scatter them in any baseball field, so we found a beautiful park. I suggested having a pickup game the night we spread his ashes. When I came up to bat, I hit the ball, which was a miracle in itself, and ran like hell. I had the distinct feeling that someone was running after me. I started laughing and giggling uncontrollably. I thought it was my brother-in-law or my new husband. It felt like someone was chasing me, playing tag. I yelled, "Stop it," playfully, and ran the bases until I reached home plate. I turned around to tag whoever had been chasing me. No one was there. I looked around, confused, and asked my family which one of them had been chasing me. They said no one had been, and that they thought I was screaming because a bee was after me. I struggled daily with the idea of a higher being. I was baptized Catholic, practiced Wicca, converted to Judaism, dabbled in Buddhism, and explored Islam. Nothing has ever fit completely. I do not know what I am, but I feel that my life has been touched in some way. I just do not know by what or by whom. If you got this far, thank you for reading. Peace. Story 63. When I get really sick, I experience strange hallucinations. They feel extremely real, and I can almost always remember them, which is odd because I usually do not remember dreams or nightmares at all. In these hallucinations, I am never doing anything spectacular. I am usually just walking around the house, driving, or doing other mundane things. Almost every time, though, I come into contact with a girl named Rachel. She will say, "quarters or more," then vanish before I can respond. After that, I see strange swirls, and colors appear more vibrant than usual. The hallucinations are not scary or like a bad trip. They also do not happen every time I am sick, only when I have a very high fever or a bad ear infection. Story 64. I am about as rational and skeptical of the supernatural as they come. Nevertheless, I have experienced a number of strange events that I usually dismiss. I cannot reproduce them consistently, and even when they are witnessed, the fact that they cannot be repeated makes them more of a "holy crap, that was weird" story than anything that inspires belief. That is what these are, my "holy crap, that was weird" moments. The first involves hearing people's thoughts. This has happened twice in a way that really stands out. When I say I heard them, I mean it felt like a hallucination of them speaking. I was not looking at the person, yet I responded to their thoughts as if they had spoken out loud. It genuinely felt like I heard their voice with my ears. Unsurprisingly, everyone involved was confused. I have tried to find a common factor between the times this happened, but I cannot. I do experience normal intuition, like knowing answers before asking questions, but these moments were different because there was an actual sensory experience. The next involves dreams that came true. I have had enough of these to seriously question why. I also have plenty of meaningless dreams, but there is a certain type that feels different. When I have those, it feels less like dreaming and more like briefly visiting a possible future before waking up in the present. They are not especially vivid. In fact, they are mundane. What stands out are specific details that I remember when I wake up. Later, when the situation actually happens, I get the unmistakable feeling that I have been there before. My best guess is that in some cases, the dreams guided me subconsciously toward making them real. In others, my brain may have been simulating likely scenarios based on my daily life. If my mind runs through many variations in dreams, it makes sense that one might eventually line up with reality. In one dream, though, I was stabbed with a large boar-like spear on the left side of my body, right in the middle of my rib cage. The pain woke me up. To this day, about 8 years later, I still have phantom pain in that spot. The most recent experience is the most memorable. The woman I am dating had never had seizures before we met. A couple of months into our relationship, she started having them. She went on medication and things were fine until one night when she had the worst seizure yet. I called emergency services, rolled her onto her side, and waited for it to pass. The seizure stopped, but then everything else stopped too. This was different. To this day, I swear she died. Her tongue hung lifelessly, her eyes stared into nothing, and her complexion was ghostly. Blue lips can happen during seizures, but this was not that. I was shouting her name and shaking her. This went on for maybe 20 or 30 seconds, possibly longer. I stood up, put my hands on my head, and started saying, "Oh no, holy hell, oh no." Then I had a moment of absolute clarity. It felt like time stopped, like I was pulled out of my body into a quiet, dark, cosmic place. I thought about how she was 22 years old, had lived a sheltered but good life, and was just beginning to really experience the world. The idea that it would end like that felt pointless and wrong. I called her name one last time and shoved her. She suddenly jolted back to life, screaming. Everything returned at once, but she was not herself. She did not seem aware of anything, and my first thought was that she had brain damage. When the paramedics arrived, one of them said, "This is not a seizure. She was taken to the hospital in critical condition." By the time I arrived, she was starting to come around. Later, she told me she did not remember screaming at all. She remembered seeing everyone in the room and trying to call out to us, but no one responded, as if we could not hear her. For days afterward, I barely slept. I would wake up in the middle of the night and go for long drives, trying to process what had happened. For at least a month, I was deeply shaken. What made it even stranger was that both I and her friends noticed a change in her afterward. It was like she came back as a different person. Not worse, just different. She changed her hair, her style, her sense of humor. She seemed sharper, less naive. I jokingly started calling her Beric Dondarrion. She has not had a seizure since, and she seems well now, but that night changed both of us. It is something I will never forget, for better or worse. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.